All right, I see we're at 7:05. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Clayton Truder. I'm the chair of the Vermont chapter of SABR. Bruce is the chair of the New Hampshire and Maine chapter. And together, which is called the new Northern New England chapter, together we're so excited tonight to present Dr. Paul Semendinger, who is going to talk about the new book he co-authored with Roy White, From Compton to the Bronx. Paul teaches at Ramapo College and is the editor-in-chief of the fantastic Yankees blog, Start Spreading the News. As a Red Sox fan, it is the only Yankees blog I look at regularly. Paul and Roy's book is available for pre-order on Amazon right now. I did so earlier today. Can't wait to read it. Can't wait to get a hold of it. I believe it comes out in April, right, Paul?
April 11th is the date that they have right now, but you know how these things go. The book's done. It's nothing on my end or anything like that, but the publisher hasn't given me the drop dead date. He keeps saying April 11th. I said, so that's definite? He goes, well, it's as definite as the publisher, the printer will whatever. So yeah, I think it's April 11th.
I hope we do it I hope it's published then. That's a nice way to celebrate my cousin Reggie's birthday. On that note, I'd like to turn the evening over to Paul. Paul is going to tell us a little bit about his book, a little bit about himself, a little bit about Roy White, and then we'll have ourselves a nice informal chat for a while. Paul, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Clayton. And I appreciate the positive words about Start Spreading the News. We have Mike Whiteman here. He is one of the writers for Start Spreading the News. And Mike actually has the distinct honor, privilege, or I don't know what the word might be, but he's actually read the book already. He did one of the early reads of the original manuscript and gave me a lot of good tips and a lot of good advice and a lot of suggestions. So Mike, thank you for that. You did great, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate your friendship. Mike is also a big fan, and we were talking before the recording started, of the game Stratomatic. He's been playing about as long as I have, since the early 80s, and over the internet. Mike and I have never met in person, but he lives in Pennsylvania and I live in New Jersey. We have played some Stratomatic across the internet through Google Meets and things like that. And just, he wins every game. So that's why I haven't played him in a couple of years. And the last crazy bit of information is his wife is a minister, and she actually married my son. So while I've never met Mike in person, I have met his wife, and she did a phenomenal job at my son's wedding almost 2 years ago already. So thank you, everyone, for inviting me to the chapter. I was a elementary school principal for 1,000 years. I retired last June at the end of the school year after 32 years in education. I was a principal for 26 years. And I loved every minute of it, but I wanted to also live life. And the job was a 24/7 job when you invest yourself completely in something. And I think it was just time for me to, start doing some other things and hopefully writing a lot more and things like that. So I am now an adjunct professor at Ramapo College. I've been doing that for about 20 years as well. And the rest of my time, I'm a writer, and which is one of my life passions. And so it's been great. But as someone who's been a teacher and is still a college professor and was a principal, I could probably talk until midnight, and no one wants that. So I'll tell you a little about the book. I'll tell you a little about how it all happened and how you can make dreams come true and things like that. But if people want to just interrupt me and ask questions and push and sort of things like that, like, hey, tell us a little more about that sounds something like I want to be interested in, I'm more than happy to do this, less formally and that kind of thing, where it's just a conversation between people who are baseball fans and who love baseball. And one last piece of information, I think some of you know this. Bill Nowlin, I believe, knows this. We've talked online and things like that. My dad is the world's biggest, at least I think so, Ted Williams fan. He started being a Red Sox fan in 1946. There was an old ad in Life magazine, a Chesterfield cigarette ad. And Ted Williams had a cigarette and Stan Musial had a cigarette. My dad and my uncle are twins. And Uncle David decided to become a St. Louis Cardinal fan. He still is from that moment on, and he's a huge Stan Musial fan. And my dad became, as I say, the biggest Ted Williams fan in the whole world. He loves my mom, of course, but I've often wondered if the reason he married her wasn't because her birthday and Ted Williams' birthday happened to both be August 30th. So I always thought that was kind of interesting. So anyway, I am one Yankee fan who doesn't hate the Red Sox. So yeah, feel free to jump in at any time. I am a writer. I've written a few books. I'm not here to push all the books, but I wrote a novel called Scattering the Ashes. I wrote this book, which came out last year, about the Yankees, 29 players who are all Moonlight Grahams of the Yankees, the guys whose entire career was one game. And both books have gotten nice reviews and all that. But as a Yankee fan, and just, I was a principal, I didn't have any connections with baseball or baseball players or anything like that. But I've always wanted to, work with baseball players. It's been my passion. And I grew up in the late 70s. My earliest baseball memory, or my great earliest memory, was Reggie Jackson hitting those 3 home runs. My parents were school teachers, and my dad was at back to school night. So I was watching the World Series game with my mom, and my dad came home. I was 9. And it was getting late, and he said, it's time for Paulie to go to bed. And my mom said, oh, let's let him stay up and watch the rest of the World Series. And I did. And after that, I was hooked. I was hooked on baseball forever, and I was hooked on the Yankees. Reggie wasn't my favorite player, but that's still my favorite moment. And of course, Roy White was a major player on those late 70s Yankees teams. And, I believe when we put ourselves out there and we just start trying to do things, writing books, writing blogs, introducing yourself to people online, joining SABR groups and things like that, other connections are made. And there's a group called the Northeast Streaming Sports Network, and they had asked me to come on to one of their shows, and I guess they liked me, and they said, come on to another show and another show, etc. And then one of the days they said, we're going to be interviewing Roy White. We know somebody who knows somebody who can get Roy White on the show. And unfortunately, Roy wasn't able to make it that night. So I just said to the guy who set it up, please tell Roy White that I'd love to write his autobiography. He's like the one Yankee from that era, the big Yankee who hasn't had a book written about him yet. And he did. And sometimes things just happen funnily, like in a funny way. He then said, Royce seems like he's interested. Here's his phone number. So I was like, wow, I have Roy White's phone number. That's the coolest thing ever. I would have been happy right there. So I texted him. This is about a year ago, Thanksgiving in 2021. And I just said, Mac, which is the guy's name, talk to you about me. I'd love to write your book. And he goes, I'll get back to you. But just a quick text back and forth. And the way things go, he never did for about a month. And then it was Christmas time, and I was working. I was a principal, so I'm working over Christmas break. And I said, you know what? Today might be a good day to just text him back. Said, it was Thanksgiving time, the holidays, et cetera, et cetera. His birthday was the day before. So I just said, happy birthday. You had said that you might want to talk to me. And then I was driving home that day, and my phone rang, and it was Roy White. And he's like, hey, how are you? I'm like, I'm great. How are you? I had to pull off to the side of the road because Roy White was calling me. And I was amazed. And so I pulled off the side of the road, and I gave him like the 30-second elevator pitch. I know you're a classy guy. Everyone's always said that. And you've never had your story written. And I'm not looking for you to write a book where you rip apart Reggie and George Steinbrenner and tell all the secrets about Mickey Mantle and Thurman Munson and anything like that. I just want to write a book with you about your career. And he said, let me think about it. And I said, listen, it's going to be your book. It'll be titled By Roy White. My name can go on the cover, but I'm happy to do whatever you want to do. And I'm not looking to put anything in the book that you're not happy with. It's going to be your book. Absolutely, positively. If you want to tell me a story, you can tell me the story. If you want it in the book, we'll put it in the book. If you don't want it in the book, we'll take it out of the book. And so he said, let me think about it. And I guess within 48 hours, I got a text back, and he wrote, I'm in. And so it was a year ago, last January or so, that we started talking for real. And basically, Roy White has always had a reputation of being the classy guy, the upfront, honest guy, the true professional on those Bronx Zoo Yankee teams. And he is every bit that man. He and I started doing Google meetings, but someone was just saying, HR was saying, like, Heather can't get her camera working. And so the first time we did it, he couldn't get his camera working. And so he said, why don't we meet in person? And so we found a secret location in Ramsey, New Jersey, where we would meet. It was called Panera Bread. And, and we just sat there at Panera Bread. The secret is we didn't always even order food. Sometimes we just went there to talk. And I would just ask Roy White questions and he would just start talking. And I'd have my computer and my keyboard here. And I would just keep typing up everything he said. And each time he did it, I then proofread what I wrote it, sent it back to him, said, is it good? And he was always happy with the way I wrote. And I don't know, we probably met once every couple of weeks from January right up through August and into September. I'll tell you this, if I wasn't retired, I would have never been able to finish on time to get the book ready for an April release with the deadlines I was facing. And it was great. And, since then we've met a number of times to then just do the other crazy things you need to do for a book. Like I've asked him to share photographs that we could have a photo spread in the book. And so, we met one day and he brought all these pictures of him and Mickey Mantle and him and Elston Howard and Willie Mays, him growing up as a kid, a picture of him and his mom, picture of him and his dad, and, pictures with Thurman Munson. Roy White was famous for leaping over the wall to catch home runs, a couple of pictures like that. And it just was an absolute super fun and extremely rewarding experience. To have Roy White give me his own personal photos and say, I trust you with these things. And I'm like, all right, I promise I won't wreck them. And so it's been great. And one of the things Roy White does is he also has a charity called the Roy White Foundation, where they give scholarships. Now, it's not like any of these big guys like Jeter or Joe Torre, where they have, hundreds of millions of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars or whatever numbers they have. His foundation is much smaller. So what they do is they give $750 to kids who are just starting out in college to pay for those incidentals, like the books or a computer and things like that, to help them along the way. And because of COVID, the charity sort of had a couple of down years because they couldn't have events. So one of the things I said was, how about we get the charity going again? And Donna was there. We had a big event in November 17th at Ramapo College. And, Roy White just sat there with me. I gave a question and we probably had about 50 or so people there, raised a few $1,000, and he just told his story. So I'll give a quick overview of Roy White's life story if you want. He grew up in Compton. He said when I talked to him at that very first phone call, he goes, I already have the title. I've been wanting to do this. It's going to be called From Compton to the Bronx. I'm like, that's it. Great. Beautiful. Like, this is his book. I wasn't going to say like, no, that title's terrible, but it's a great title because he grew up in Compton. He grew up in poverty. His parents in the 1940s were an interracial couple. So they were decades 50 or more years ahead of their time, but because of the social pressures at the time, the marriage didn't work out. So Roy lived with his mom. They did not have a lot of money. She did not have a lot of resources, and he grew up in a tough neighborhood at a tough time. And there were a couple of incidents where, people he knew got beat up, and he almost got beat up once. He tells the story as he was running away, he ran across his little league field and the grass was slick and he slipped and he fell in the outfield. And then years later, when he was playing in left field for the Yankees, it brought back the vision of the time he was laying on the field in Compton, running away from these thugs who wanted to beat him up. And they didn't chase him onto the field. They must have lost him as he made that quick trip to the field. But he thought like, wow, I could have died that day, or I could have been maimed forever. And I didn't. I fell and I survived. And here I am in left field at Yankee Stadium. Who would have thunk it? He grew up with a lot of other guys who made the major leagues, like Reggie Smith. And one of the fun stories in his life is all these guys were getting signed to contracts for tens of thousands of dollars. And no one was willing to sign Roy White, even though he was playing on par with all these other great players and in his area. And finally, he realizes that nobody signed him because they thought he was going to go to college, but he wanted to be a baseball player. And a guy who was named Tuffy Hanshin, who was a Yankee scout, just showed up at his door one day and he said, "You want to be a Yankee? I have a contract for you." And this guy had made all these arrangements without even telling the Yankees, but he signed Roy White to a contract for like $2,000. And And then Roy was signed. Another interesting story about Roy's childhood is he had polio, but his grandmother was a nurse in a hospital, and she recognized the symptoms quickly and got him to the hospital quickly. And I guess with some penicillin and some quick doctor care, it didn't hurt him and didn't affect him at all. And he missed about 4 months of school, but he worked really hard. He was a good student, and he actually was able to get back to the grade level. So the first time he ever goes on an airplane is as a young adult, like 18 or 19 years old. He heads to the Florida to Yankee spring training. Now, Roy White's an African-American, but in the 1960s, when he flew to Florida, that was Jim Crow South. There was segregation and stories of, obviously a lot of racism. And one of the stories he tells is Roy White is a light-skinned black man. Here's a good picture. This is actually from the cover of the book. And the Yankees, or whoever made the arrangements, must not have realized he was black. And so he keeps showing up at the field every day with the team for practice. And a couple of the black guys came up to him and they said, like, well, where are you staying? And he says, I'm staying at the Hilton or whatever it was. And they're like, you can't stay there. That's only for the white guys. He's like, I don't know. I'm staying there. But after that, he was never allowed to stay with the team again. And so it was a tough road through the minor leagues. When I would ask Roy White about that, and I'd say, like, how was that? People would yell things at him, racial epithets, you can imagine, like, and his name is Roy White. So people would say, like, now batting Roy White. And people would yell, like, no, he's not. And like, just horrible stuff. And I said, how was that to deal with? And he said, you know what? It wasn't fun, but the guys who came before me, they had it worse. And that was really like what it was with Roy White always. And Mike could jump in if he wants when he reads the book, but he's so modest that anytime he would tell me a story about something great that he did, and he did a lot of great things, obviously. He was a multiple-time All-Star. He played an entire year without ever making an error. He still holds the American League record for sacrifice flies in a season, etc. There would always be like, yeah, but... He's a very self-depreciating guy. So I wrote a chapter at the end where I tried to summarize, like, this is why Roy White was successful. And he read it and he goes, I like it. And he thought about it. And then he reached out to me the next day and he goes, it's good, but it doesn't sound like me. I wouldn't say like the reason I was successful. I don't talk about myself like that. So I said, oh man, darn, because I really like that. So I said to him, what if I change it to, this is why Roy White was successful by me? And he goes, yeah, you can do that. So I changed it all. So it wasn't too, self-promoting on his part. So eventually makes it to the Yankees in like 1965. He plays, with Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris and Whitey Ford. He gets to the Yankees right as the dynasty ends, right? The dynasty ends in 64. And by the time he gets to the Yankees are terrible. And he plays through those terrible years. And, 1970, Thurman Munson comes, and then 73, George Steinbrenner buys the Yankees. And slowly the Yankees get back to respectability. And he plays, with Reggie and Nettles and all those good guys. And is on the World Series team in 76, the World Series champs in 77 and 78. And after the 79 season, the Yankees said they wanted to bring him back, but they were, he felt they weren't being honest in their negotiations with him. And so they said, the most we can offer you, I think it was 150,000. They said, we can't go over that number because of your age. And then he found out, because the players weren't as open about contracts back then, that Luis Tiant was offered more money. And he was older. And he goes, wait. Like, he's not a lifetime Yankee. I'm a lifetime Yankee. Like, give me a break. And they go, like, take it or leave it. And so he said, well, I'm not going to take it. You're insulting me at the end of my career. So one thing leads to another. And he ends up then playing 3 years in Japan for the Yomiuri Giants, helps them win a Japan Series championship, which is the Japanese equivalent. The cool thing was when he came up with the Yankees, he was such a good hitter that the Yankees batted him fourth behind Mickey Mantle to protect Mantle in the lineup. When he goes to Japan, he bats fourth in the lineup to protect Sadahara Oh, the greatest Japanese home run hitter of all time. So a lot of cool things like that. Later on, he scouts some Japanese players like Ichiro and Hideki Matsui. And it's his scouting report that makes the difference between the Yankees deciding whether or not to take a chance on Matsui. And then Matsui becomes the only other player to win a world championship with the Yankees and the Tokyo Yomiuri Giants. Interesting, they're both left fielders, right? But Roy White was the first. And then after that, he has a career as a coach with the Yankees. He spends a year as a general manager, roving hitting instructor, roving coach, spends some years coaching in the Oakland A's system, and comes back to the Yankees. And that's really his story. Classy guy. He was there in 1985, sitting around the table when Yogi Berra was fired. And then, there was that big rift with Yogi and George Steinbrenner where Yogi said, I'm never going to go back to Yankee Stadium. And I just love the way he describes that as I wrote it in the book. He writes, this isn't my story to tell. I can just tell that I was there when this happened. But he wouldn't give any of, he obviously saw the anger and the upset and the discussions, however they went. I never asked because I didn't feel it was my place. I didn't want to push. If he offered stuff, I happily listened and we talked about it. But if he didn't offer, I didn't want to push him. He's just, and Donna met him that night a couple months ago at Ramapo College. He's just such a decent human being that, I never wanted him to felt like I'm trying to pry secret information from you, that like I have an ulterior motive. There was no ulterior motive or anything. It was just, I want to write a book with you. And he told his story. And I think it's a very compelling book. It tells a lot of stories about how he became a great baseball player. What he did to condition himself. One thing he realized was he needed to get in better shape. And so in the middle of his career, he takes up karate and does karate over the wintertime for a couple of years. And that's right before Bill Verdon becomes the Yankee manager. And Bill Verdon had been a Pirates outfielder, and he was like a real fit type of guy. And that spring training, he worked the Yankees to the bone. And the one guy who didn't really get too much problem with that was Roy White, because he came to camp in shape in the days when players didn't necessarily come to camp in shape. He had a nice way of saying things like, I asked him, like, who was the best manager ever you played for? Ralph Houck. And then he'd say stuff like, Ralph was always honest. And I said, were other managers not honest? And he'd say stuff like, well, there were times when Billy Martin promised me I'd play and I sat the bench. And you sort of read between the lines. I don't think he was the biggest Billy Martin fan and things like that. But I'd love to talk about any questions. I'd love to answer any questions. I'd love to tell more. I don't want to monopolize your meeting and talk for 40 hours. So that's sort of an overview of the book. It comes out in April, and I sent it to a lot of different writers. And the feedback that I've gotten is it feels like you're sitting down and talking with Roy White, and it's a compelling read, and it's really terrific. So, but that's me talking about a book that I wrote. So take that with a grain of salt, I guess.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It looks like Jeff has his hand up, and I see somebody else does too. Go. We're not that formal here in Vermont. Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. And thanks, Dr. Paul. I'm looking forward to reading the book.
Thank you.
I want to know, how did Roy White, first of all, I'm a Mets fan, and Roy White is definitely a classiest Yankee during those years. How did he avoid becoming involved in the Bronx Zoo, so to speak, of all that craziness?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the things there was an event in 1979. Rich Gossage and Cliff Johnson got in a fight in the locker room in the shower, and Cliff Johnson ends up breaking Goose's thumb, as I recall, and he's out for 2 months. And at that point, the Yankees were talking about taking the Cy Young Award winner, Ron Guidry, and making him the closer, and it never really happened. But I asked him, I said, well, how'd that all shake out? Roy White figured out a way, and I'll tell you that this was one of the reasons a lot of the Yankees hated playing at Shea, because a lot of them lived in northern New Jersey. He figured out a way that they could get off the field. They had their own parking lot right outside the stadium, shower, get dressed, and be out of the stadium and on the George Washington Bridge before most fans got out of the stadium. He goes, I didn't hang around, and the game was over, and I left. And there were a number of Yankees that did that. One of the things they didn't like about Shea was, you had to deal with going to Queens and a couple more bridges, and there was no quick way around the traffic that they knew how to get around. And so the commute then became long to and from the stadium going to Shea. But when they were at Yankee Stadium, he basically just avoided that. There were a number of guys. Guidry was one of those guys. Chris Chambliss, Willie Randolph. One of the other cool things that I had the ability to do with the book was I have a number of chapters in there where I talked to some of his teammates and asked them to talk about what it was like to play with Roy White. So one of them is Ian Dixon, who no one's ever heard of because he was just a minor league player, but they became like super duper friends. And I reached out to Ian Dixon. And so there's a chapter during the minor league years of playing baseball, Roy White in the minor leagues. I talked to Chris Chambliss. I talked to Willie Randolph, who he also coached with. And there was another player who he played with on the Giants named John Sippen, who had played very briefly with the Padres and then became a star in Japan, played there for about 8 years, and he was terrific. And Roy and he had lost contact. And so one of the proud things that I did in the book was I found John Sippen and was able to talk to him, and I reconnected him with Roy White. So I brought an old friendship back together. Nice. But yeah, so he just, he didn't get involved in that stuff. There were other guys that's what they focused on. And he said when the writers would come in, they would flock to Reggie. They'd flock to Billy Martin. They'd flock to Sparky Lyle and Thurman Munson. And they knew that other guys weren't going to involve themselves in it. And he was one of those guys.
Thank you.
It looked like, Donna, did you have your hand up for a second?
I did, and I took it down when you said things were more informal, but then I didn't want to step on the
Donna, go ahead. Donna, Alec, and then Dennis. Go ahead, Donna.
Well, I wanted to first of all talk about what Dr. Semendinger talked about with.
By the way, I'm Paul. That's the reason it says Dr. Sem on there. That's left over from when I was the principal and doing school online.
So, okay, Paul. When I got to the event at Ramapo, Roy White, now granted it was an informal event, whatever, but even still, I've been to plenty of events where there are, the guest speakers, if you will, who, make a grand appearance. He was walking around the room, shaking hands, greeting everybody, thanking them for coming, and genuinely spending time standing there having a conversation, not just, hey, I hope you give me some money for my foundation and moving on. That wasn't even part of the conversation. It was just, hey, how are you? What's up? Tell me a little bit about you, which was wonderful. And then the other thing is, I want to make this about you for a minute, Paul. There's enough Yankee fans in here. Can you please do your Bob Shepard imitation? I got to hear it that night. Other people should hear it too.
I can't promise it'll be very good, but all right. I've never done it really over Zoom, so it might be disappointing to everyone. But anyway, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Yankee Stadium. Leading off for the Yankees in left field, number 6, Roy White, number 6. Here you go.
That's just fabulous.
That was awesome. I have to unmute myself. That was excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll tell you a really funny story about that. When I became a principal, it was late in the day, and thought I was by myself in the school, and I was just finishing something in the main office, and the microphone was there, and so I was like, "Why not?" So I did the Bob Shepard thing, and then I was all proud of myself, and I was walking into the hall, talking to an empty school, and then the child study team door opens, and the people from the child study team walk out, and a couple parents who had just had this meeting with them, and I was like, oh, I'm sorry. And then the dad said, "No, that was great, thanks." I was like, oh, geez. What a way to ruin your career right at the start. Like, what's he doing? Anyway.
Can you do Phil Rizzuto next?
I can't. I wish. Oh. Holy cow! I don't believe it.
Cow.
Look at Roger Maris.
Paul, can you introduce Alec as Bob Shepard for his question?
Sure. Now batting. What number are you, Alec?
19.
Number 19, Alec Stice. Number 19.
Well, thank you. you've already given us a little bit of insight into this, and again, we're all excited that you're here. But who do you think he was closest with on those great Yankee teams like Randolph or Chambliss? I mean, I would think that like the less crazy people would be my estimate, but
That's one of his best friends was Thurman. They had their lockers right next to each other the whole time. And, you know, Thurman would have been Roy White was the only guy who played the entire decade of the 70s with the Yankees. Thurman would have been also, obviously, but he died in that terrible plane crash on August 2nd of 79. But, yeah, like Roy tells about how in 78, I hate to bring this up, but when the Yankees were catching the Red Sox, you know, Thurman just every day would sit at his locker and go, you know what? If we just win today, it's just going to be down to 9 games. You know, we got time. If we just win today, it's going to be down to 7 games. And yeah, so he talks about Thurman highly. He talks about Chris Chambliss highly. Here's a Chris Chambliss story that's amazing. Roy White came up as an infielder. The Yankees moved him into the outfield. The same way that happened with Bobby Mercer. Same thing happened with Mickey Mantle. But one year, the Yankees started to think like, well, maybe we'd rather have him play first base. And so spring training comes around and they say to Roy White, you're going to be playing first base. He didn't have a first baseman's glove. And so Chris Chambliss loans him his glove. That's just amazing. I don't know how often you see stuff like that in sports. Usually if somebody's trying to take your position, you're like, you're not using my stuff to take my position. Because Chris Chambliss in his first couple of years with the Yankees had been a little bit of a disappointment because the Yankees thought he'd hit more home runs and he wasn't quite the power hitter they thought he'd be. And Lou Piniella tried a little bit at first base and Roy White did. And Chris Chambliss was nothing but gracious in helping them try to replace him. And it didn't happen, which was good for the Yankees and good for Roy White and good for Lou Piniella and Chambliss.
Dennis, what number are you?
You know, I grew up a big Thurman Munson fan, so you know that the number 15 has always sort of stayed with me. I mean, he was my man growing up, but I was a big Roy White fan as well.
So now talking number 15, Dennis Garcia, number 15.
I like the way you had the Garcia on it. It's great. Thank you very much. And thanks for your time, Paul. I really appreciate it. And a few months ago, I read your book, The Least Among Them. And I really
thank you.
So thanks a lot. It was a terrific book. And so a question I have is about the possibility for Roy White's induction into Monument Park. I think you can make also a great case for Greg Nettles as well, right? But it really seems that these guys have been forgotten, unfortunately, right? And you think about the great history and legacy of the Yankees. I think it's very sad that in some respects they've been forgotten. So have some thoughts about that.
I agree with you 100%. Roy White belongs in Monument Park. One of the things that came out of me writing this book was, you know, I'm hoping that that's one of the residual things that happens as a result of maybe Roy White getting a lot more attention from the Yankees and from people reading his book, because he has been largely forgotten. I had a parent come up to me the other day, a couple months ago now, but say like, "Oh, what are you going to do now that you're retired?" I said, "Well, you've heard of Roy White?" "Oh, yes, I'm a big Yankee fan." "Well, I'm writing a book with Roy White." And then they go, he was so great doing the games with Phil Rizzuto. And I'm like, no, that was Bill White. But, you know, they you know, so they don't even remember who Roy White was, even people who are big Yankee fans. So, yes, he was if you look at the Yankee list, if you go on Baseball Reference and you look at all-time Yankees, in almost every single category, Roy White's up there. If he's not in the top 10, he's in the top 15 of all time with the Yankees in, like I say, in virtually every category. And I get frustrated with the Yankees because of the fact that Nettles, absolutely, and I have a chapter in the Least Among Them, as you know, about Nettles belonging in Monument Park. The Yankees don't even have a third baseman in Monument Park. It's kind of ridiculous. There have been so many great third basemen. The best of all, I think, is Nettles. He was my favorite player as a kid. You know, they go out and they put Paul O'Neill in Monument Park. And I don't want to criticize Paul O'Neill. Paul O'Neill was a great Yankee. The Yankees won a lot of World Series with Paul O'Neill, but Paul O'Neill was not Roy White. And Paul O'Neill wasn't even Hank Bauer. And, you know, they retire Paul O'Neill's number. They retired his number? Paul O'Neill? like to me, it makes no sense. And it seems like it's more of a marketing thing. Oh, he's our announcer. We can bring people into the ballpark. If we have Roy White Day, nobody will come. Like, who's Roy White? Why would we do that? And I think that's what it really comes down to. And I think it's frustrating. Something I've written a lot about is, like when they retired Paul O'Neill's number, they could have at the same time said, we also have some other great outfielders who also deserve to have their number retired. And here's the beauty of the negative that the Yankees have retired too many numbers, because they have. There's players like Paul O'Neill who are great. I don't think they deserve to have their number retired. They're not all-time legends like Babe Ruth or Thurman Munson, who died when he was a Yankee. So, and he was the captain. I think that's obviously deserves to have a number retired. But you can retire Roy White's number right now, and nothing would change because he wore number 6, and it's already retired for Joe Torre. And Hank Bauer, who was a right fielder, who played on a lot of World Series teams, who was also a World War II hero, is forgotten. No one knows who Hank Bauer is. And if the Yankees are going to honor a great right fielder, the time was right to say, we're also going to honor Hank Bauer, and we're going to retire number 9 for Hank Bauer. It's already retired for Roger Maris. Just say it's Hank Bauer too, and then say it's for Greg Nevels too. It seems like it's more political, more marketing or something, that certain players are honored in Monument Park and other players who are very worthy and more worthy, I think, of some of the guys who are in there who don't get in there. So yeah, that's frustrating to me. And I'm sort of hoping that as a result of the book, that wasn't the plan, but as a result of the book, that maybe Roy White finally gets that recognition. And, he's not young, he's 78. And I think it's a shame that when these guys get to these ages that they get forgotten. And it's the Yankees' job as an organization, I think, to promote all of their great players, all of their past players. And so promote Roy White and give him his due once and for all. What often happened with Buck O'Neil in the Hall of Fame a couple of years ago, right? Like somebody who deserves to be there. Their whole life they wait, and then they die, and then people go, oh, we should have put him in. And then they put him in. Like, I would rather the people get that honor when they're alive so they can say, like, I made it. And he belongs in there. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Looks like Bruce is on deck. Guess he's coming up to the plate now.
Now batting, Bruce McClure.
It comes across in the way that you discuss this book that it's not just a book. It's more of a real labor of love, or something that you looked forward to doing, as opposed to doing it as a side gig or a vocation or whatever. When you describe the book, or you describe your meetings with Roy, or the discussion of pictures and whatnot, it really shines through. And I think that's going to shine through in the pages as you read. I think Mike would probably back me up on this, because he's read the book. And Mike is also one of the more thoughtful and bright members of our organization who can grasp that in meeting someone or reading their words. I think part of the thing with Roy White not being as remembered as he should be has a lot to do with the fact that there was that gap of a couple of years. And my father had said this years ago when I was a kid, because he liked Roy White. And he would talk about how a lot of these players, as he would put it, aren't going to be remembered as much as they should be, because they lost a couple of years in Yankee Stadium. They lost that backdrop. And I mean, I sometimes wonder if that affects Thurman Munson's memory, because he lost those 2 years in Yankee Stadium. It's like these 2 years that are forgotten, that just never really happened. I don't know.
And those years hurt Bobby Mercer. I mean, he couldn't hit in Shea Stadium. And then the Yankees traded him for Bobby Bonds, right? It's changes the complete course of Bobby Mercer's career, definitely.
Mike will get a kick out of this as well. In my 1974 American League Stratomatic replay, seeing as how you got Strat behind you there, Roy's hitting 296, 2 home runs, and 22 RBIs in 49 games.
Nice. That's awesome. I'll tell you a funny story about Roy White. One of the times we were going to meet, he had to call me up and cancel because he said, I'm at my daughter's house and we need to get a new washing machine or dishwasher or something like that. And they said they were going to come and we were going to be the first people of the day. And now it's noon and there's no way I'm going to be able to meet you at 1 o'clock because they still have to come take the old one out. And I just thought that was so fun because, you know, in my brain, if the delivery people are coming, they look on the list and here's a Major League Baseball player. I'm going to his house, you know. He's like, nope, I'm just anybody. I'm just a regular guy. Another funny time was early on when we were going to meet. He said, I have to cancel. And I'm like, nuts, because I really want to be doing this. And he keeps canceling. And he had to go to a card show. Joe Pepitone was going to appear. It was going to be in Connecticut. And Pepitone took ill. And so I guess Joe Pepitone called Roy White and said, can you go up to this baseball card show and fill in for me? And so Roy White couldn't meet with me because he had a pinch hit, even at this late age for Joe Pepitone. So there's all sorts of crazy things like that happen. That just to show that like he was just a real guy. He's just a real person. And I thank you because I hope that's what it does show in the book, Bruce.
Paul, I have a question. You mentioned the Shea Stadium years for a couple of players, and I don't want to go off topic, but during that time you mentioned Bobby Mercer had a hard time. I'm not sure how Roy White felt and Durham Munson, but I guess what was the alternative? I mean, they had to renovate Yankee Stadium, and all we hear over the years, and I might be biased being a Met fan, I love Shea Stadium, but what was the alternative to them going there?
You know, I've never heard of an alternative. There probably wasn't one.
Join the Giants at the Yale Bowl.
Yeah, maybe.
Oh God, I lived in Connecticut for years. No.
How about Roosevelt Stadium in Jersey City? Was that even still around in the mid 70s? I don't know. You know, my dad.
Alex just put that up in the chat. That's right. That's funny. Alex just put up Jersey City in the chat.
So maybe there were a couple options, probably really nothing, and so they had to do it. This has nothing to do with Roy White, but I'll tell you a quick funny thing. So I was retiring, and one of my teachers somehow had a connection that she knew Darryl Strawberry, not really well, but they had met once, and somehow she and him exchanged Instagram accounts or something like that. She and her husband went out to dinner, and they recognized him, and he came over and sat with them. I don't quite understand how that whole connection worked, because why, but they did, and now they're friends. I don't know. She told him, you know, all right, we have this great principal and he's retiring. And he goes, I want to meet him. And so one day he surprises me at my school. He just walks into my office and like, he goes, I want to meet you. And we had a catch and everything. But you talk about Shea Stadium. What do you say when Darryl Strawberry walks into your office? Like, so I'm like, and so the only thing I could think of was, remember when you hit that home run when you were a Yankee at Shea and they had the big apple coming up out of the top hat, but they didn't bring the Met logo? And he's like, I do remember that. So
I tell you, the person who really hated those years at Shea Stadium was Pete Flynn, because they had the Giants, the Jets, the Mets, and the Yankees at the same time. So he had a hard time with that.
And I think Elliot Maddox did get hurt. Yes, I'm not sure how that all worked out, but yeah, Elliot Maddox got hurt in the outfield at Shea. I have no idea how that turned out.
Paul, I had a couple of kind of logistical things on writing the book. First
Yes.
of all, I wondered, there's so many memoirs of Yankees from the 60s and 70s, and so of varying quality and varying levels of interest. Did any of them influence your approach to the book? And then secondly, what advice would you have for somebody who's co-authoring a book with a well-known sports figure?
So I've read probably all of those books, and the only influence they had on me was I wasn't going to be the guy who, you know, dug for the dirt and wrote a tell-all story. You know, I think we could all have tell-all stories about behind the scenes and what happens in our lines of work and this and that. And that's just not my style. So I was just talking to somebody about that the other day, and they're like, what's next? And I do have a couple of little embers, hopefully in the fire, that lead to a couple more books like this. And somebody said, oh, you could probably get somebody and they could write a really juicy one. And I said, like, I don't want that. I don't want that to be the stories I write. I don't want to write the real juicy story about the Yankees of today or anything like that. You know, like when I play Stratomatic, you know, they're all heroes. I'm always happy when I ask, like, hey, was Willie Randolph a good guy? Yeah, Willie Randolph was a great guy. Oh, nice. Because I want the baseball players I root for to actually be good human beings. So one of the things about Roy White to make him such a great guy is he is such a great guy. So I think when you write, the advice I would have would be you just have to be yourself. You write the way you write. Again, when I talked to Willie Randolph, one of the things he said, because I told him, now that we've talked, I'm going to send you what I wrote. If there's anything you don't like, send it back to me, because I'm not going to print anything that you're not happy with. And then, of course, Roy White's got to be happy with it too. But he was like, wow, no one's ever done that like that for me. You know, like give me right of refusal on what you're writing. And I said, yeah, because you're giving me your words, and this isn't like I'm not a newspaper reporter who's trying to get a story. I'm not looking for some angle. I'm just looking to tell the story the way the story needs to be told, because you're telling me what you want to remember about Roy White, what you want the people to remember about Roy White. So, you know, I would just say do it your way. Do it the way you do it. I've also been a big believer that in order to make your dreams come true, you have to put yourself out there. And I've been told no more times probably than anybody. I've been rejected for books more times probably than anybody. And you just keep trying to find ways to have people figure out that they should eventually say yes, because you're doing good work and you're a go-getter. And I had no real hopes that Roy White was ever going to reach out to me, or that I was even going to get his phone number. But I did. And, you know, when you keep pushing, sometimes good things happen. And that I'm a believer in that. You have to make your own success and make your own luck. And I think Thomas Jefferson said something along that. Isn't it amazing that the most successful people are the ones that try hardest, or something like that? I think Francis has a question.
Yes. Horace Clarke, of course, was not a great second baseman in Yankee history. But at the same time, Roy White and he did cross paths.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I've felt that Horace Clarke, because that era of the Yankee problems corresponded with his career, he's kind of gotten a bad shake out of all that as far as reputation goes, because he wasn't the reason the Yankees were losing all those games. Did Roy White have expressed any feelings about Horace Clarke? And
they were roommates
for him.
And Roy White used to bring his record player on the road, and they'd bring their jazz albums, and they would play their jazz albums. I think that's another reason why Roy White was out of the news. You know, other guys were going to bars and things like that. Roy White was going back to the room with Horace Clarke and listening to jazz records. He talks about, I've asked him about like other players, like, did you talk to them much? And he seemed to have a nice relationship with like Tony Oliva and Rod Carew. And he goes, yeah, sometimes like if we were playing in Minnesota, we'd get together, we'd go out and, you know, we'd sit around and we'd talk baseball. Like, and I just found that fascinating, because you always hear the stories about the other guys who were at the bars and picking up girls. And, you know, my favorite baseball book of all time, this sort of sounds contradictory, but is Ball 4. I mean, I've read Ball 4 probably 1,000 times. That's just a phenomenal book. And Jim Bouton, quick story, was also as kind as Roy White. When I was a kid in high school, I actually found his phone number in the phone book. He was actually listed in TNEC. And I used to have a TV program in our high school, and a friend and I actually had the chance to meet him and interview him for our TV show this is like 1983, something like that. But he was very kind. And I don't know if he has that reputation because he was, wrote Ball 4 and all that, but he was very nice to two kids from high school back in the 80s.
Any other questions? Heard a little ding. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, it's my phone.
Oh, it's your phone. Okay. I didn't know if it was there's about 25 different things with Zoom I don't understand, so I assumed it was some function I had screwed up.
Mm-mm.
Has writing a couple of baseball books changed in any way the way you watch or follow baseball?
No, not at all. The books have come out as a result of my love of baseball. I also think, Bruce brought this up before too. Like I wrote it because I just wanted to write it. I'm lucky, right? I've had a great career. I gave my life to the educational system. I think I made a nice living for myself. Obviously, if you're an educator, you don't make millions of dollars, but I always felt that they paid me very fairly and very well. And, I have a pension now. So I'm not somebody who has to do this in order to make ends meet. I can do it because it is something that I'm just passionate about and that I love. And I can do it in that regard, which probably makes it a little different than somebody who's looking to make the big splash. I'll tell you one other really quality thing about Roy White was once we settled on the idea we're going to write a book and we got our publisher and all that kind of stuff, I said to him, no, we got to figure out, and I don't like talking money. It's not my thing. Like I would just give everything away for free. I hate that kind of stuff. But it's like, how do you want to handle the proceeds when we start making money on this thing? People start buying the book. 60-40, you get 60, I get 40, you get 70, I get 30. I mean, how do you want to do it? You get 99, I get 1. Because I really didn't care. I mean, obviously I'd rather make $1 million, but he said, no, Paul, if we're going to do this, 50-50, right down the middle.
Nice.
Like, it's unbelievable. I don't think most people are like that. I think most people are like, well, it's my story. Like I'll give you 2%. So.
Paul, I have another question, and I'm sorry if I'm asking too many questions, but I went to Mets fantasy camp last year, and I had a time of my life, and I saw my heroes, Ron Swoboda and Duffy Dyer, and they were down there. Does Roy White do Mets fantasy camp? I know I met with Ron Bloomberg at the New York State Baseball Hall of Fame, and I know he does fantasy camp. Does Roy White participate in those type of things?
I think he used to. I don't believe he does anymore. He talked about there was he talks about a story where he hit a long ball to deep center field against the Orioles in the early 70s, and Paul Blair went back and leaped above the wall and robbed Roy White of, I think, would have been a game-winning home run. And he was mad about that, boy. He's like, I can't believe it. That darn Paul Blair. Paul Blair becomes a Yankee, of course, later on. He's the guy that replaces Reggie in that game in Boston when Billy Martin pulls Reggie out in the middle of the inning. Roy White, by the way, believes Reggie was not loafing on the play. He goes, I was out there. I was watching it. If he was loafing, I would have been mad at him. He didn't. He just played it poorly. But Billy wanted every excuse to try to show Reggie up. So I don't know if that's dirt, but that's his perspective, and that's in the book. But he goes, I was at fantasy camp, and Paul Blair one day shows up with that picture. And he goes, remember this, Roy? Remember when I made this catch, Roy? And he goes, oh, I was mad at him. But I think in a good way, like they laugh and stuff like that. So it wasn't really mad. But yeah, so he used to do them, but I haven't heard that he's done them in a number of years. He obviously didn't do it last year. Mm-hmm. And, he's 78 now. And I do think the COVID stuff does play a role in all that about, being out there with a lot of people doing a lot of different things like that.
Yeah.
Secretly, I still play baseball. I play in a over 50 league. I pitch, and I kept telling him about, I got a game tonight. And I kept hoping that he'd say, oh, where? Let me come. But we had a writer, a professional baseball player writer association where we had a job to do, and we've done that. But people are like, you're friends with Roy White? I don't know if we're friends. We're friendly. We text each other, and he texted me on Father's Day last year out of the blue, just said Happy Father's Day. He's a nice guy, but we don't hang out yet.
Anybody else have any other questions of this fantastic book? I hope you guys all go and pre-order tonight the minute we hang up.
Well, do
That'd
you
be
have
great.
any more details on that April event, when it might be? I want to put it on the calendar.
Oh, you're awesome. I'm hoping it's at the same location at Ramapo College. We're meeting next Thursday. The guy who ran the auction, and Murray, the guy who introduced him, who runs the foundation, Roy, me, and Roy's son, Reed. And the book comes out on April 11th, and I don't have the date yet, but I'm going to push for Thursday, April 6th. I think Thursday nights are good nights for these things. And that's the tentative date for that.
Okay, I am tentatively penciling it in.
If you go to Start Spreading the News, there's going to be a banner. If it's not up there yet, my son does the technical stuff, and if it's not up there yet, it'll be up there within a day. And it's going to have a link for all the different book signings and stuff that we're setting up, and library visits and SABR meetings and things like that.
Okay, thank
It'll
you.
say something like Paul Semendinger appearances. Click on it, and they'll all pop right up.
Awesome, thank you.
And Paul, if you're not in the area, how can you best support the Roy White Foundation?
You could send a check to the Roy White Foundation. It's.
Is there a website or anything, or?
There is. It hadn't been updated in a while, and I was talking to the one guy, Ken, just yesterday about it. And one of the things they're doing is they're going to update the site to make sure it's. COVID, I think, played roles in ways that just, people then just lost sight of some of the things they were doing extra. They had this whole big event that they were going to do. I think they booked a place in Queens. They had a number of artists, musical artists, and it was going to be like in April of 2020, and the whole thing shut down. I think the foundation lost some money on that. And, I think then people just like, now what? And so that's where I said, well, why don't we just do something small and easy? I have connections at Ramapo College, and why don't we just do something there? This would be easy. There's no overhead, and anything we make, even if it's $10, goes to the foundation. And so that was our first one back. And so that's now spurred them to go, hey, let's get this thing rolling again. But if you type in Roy White Foundation, there is a site and there is an address and ways you could donate. But thank you.
Bruce just posted the link. Thank you.
Oh, awesome.
If that's all, thank you, Paul, so much for a fantastic evening. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Looking forward to reading the book. Please feel free to join us in the Vermont chapter anytime. I'm Clayton Truder, ctruder@gmail.com. Go ahead.
Before we go, I'm sorry, Clayton. We're going to meet again on Monday, the 9th. I'm going to be hosting Eric Poulin, who's actually a childhood friend of mine. We grew up in the same town in Massachusetts. And he's going to be discussing the found poetry of Jerry Remy. And I believe he has a neat little announcement regarding a new project that SABR is going to start with that. So I hope everybody can join us. Email me for the link as well. Clayton has it. We'd love to have you.
I just want to thank you all for coming and listening, and
Paul, thanks.
Feel free to reach out to me at any time too. I love talking baseball. I love hanging out, and I have time now too, so it's great.
Thank you very much,
We
Paul.
appreciate you, Paul.
Thank you.